So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. We are really excited to have you be part of this webinar. I am personally very excited to listen to Alastair, who's our guest for today. He is a Senior Director, Business Transformation and Learning at Mutual Value Labs. And he's got some really exciting stuff to share with us. So in the meantime, those of you who've been on AVP webinars, you'll know we like to get to know each other a bit. So as you come in, please use the chat function to tell us your name, your organization, and where you're dialing in from. And especially if you can also add on to that, where is this topic of interest to you? That'll be really great. So your name, organization, which town or country you're dialing in from, and then why is this topic of interest to you? But welcome. Thank you so much for making time to join us. And we'll get kicking in a bit. So your name, your organization, which town you're joining from, and why this topic is of interest to you. But appreciate you making time to be with us today. Good. Oh, Samia, nice to meet you from Tunisia. It's good. We seem to be getting more and more people dialing in from North Africa, which is superb. So it's great to have you here, Samia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Most welcome, most welcome. So use the chat. For those who are dialing in, please use the chat to tell us your name, your organization, where you're dialing in from, which is town or country, and why this topic is of interest to you. We'll get started in a short while. So as people are putting that information into the chat, my name is Frank Aswani. I'm the CEO at ABPA. Dialing in from freezing Johannesburg. It's very cold. We've got a terrible cold front coming in from the south at the moment. So that's why some of us are in jerseys and stuff while in the house. But we're excited to be warmed up by what is promising to be a very engaging conversation that helps us really think about how we can deliver more from within the corporate space. Private sector involvement in the SDGs is very critical. We're not going to achieve the SDGs without private sector involvement. So for today, if you go to the next slide, we're going to follow the following agenda. We'll have a quick intro, and then I'll get into conversations with Alastair for a bit. He's got some really cool case studies that he wants to share with us. I think we should really bring the message home in terms of how organizations are able to converge profit and purpose while retaining value for both stakeholders and the company. And all along and through this process, please, once again, use the chat to post your questions. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible, and we'll answer them as we go through the conversation. So that's the format we'll use, and we'll have some closing remarks at the end. So that's kind of the agenda for today. Next slide. So just remind everyone as you come in, please put your name, organization, where you're dialing in from, and why this is of interest to you. So for those who are engaging AVP for the first time, we are a Pan-African network of social investors aiming to address Africa's SDG financing gap. And we bring together investors working across what we call the continuum of capital, deploying grants or equity into the impact space. And about 80% of our members or our network are financial capital providers. The other 20 are non-financial service providers. And the whole purpose is to try and achieve the vision of an African continent where collaborative and effective social investments result in exponential social impact and achievement of the SDGs. And a lot of the work we do is really around ecosystem building, knowledge sharing. So please go to our website and check out like our Value Hub and Knowledge Hub. And then under our Leadership Development Center, we run some really excellent programs, capacity building programs. And you'll also get a chance to have a look at our deal share platform, which is a critical part of our ecosystem building work. Next slide, please. So this webinar is a third in a series of webinars we've been talking about on this issue of bringing back the SDGs and back on track. And The objectives behind this series was to really, first of all, bring about the role of corporate Africa in reviving the SDGs. As I mentioned earlier, we will not achieve the SDGs without active participation of the private sector. And for the private sector, the corporate sector in particular is of critical importance to us. It also brings to life strategies for aligning organization goals with SDGs. And if you joined us in the last webinar, you saw how we spoke to Safaricom and what they're doing in Kenya. And they've delivered that particular process of aligning SDGs to their strategies with global excellence. They are recognized as one of the best in the world at doing that. And we'll continue to get some practical examples of how purpose-driven strategies can lead to innovative solutions and competitive advantage. And Alastair will cover a lot of that today. Next slide. So the first webinar we had, we featured Amanda Williams and the research she did. And as Africans, one of the concerns we have is we're on course to meet only 2 of the 17 SDGs. We're running about 194 billion SDG financing gap a year. The backdrop of that is quite scary because aid to Africa is declining. Our governments generally are racking up a lot of public debt, so they are broke. And we have a growing population, adding about 1 million people a month to the continent. So those 3 factors don't create a very good picture in terms of having less money to support more people. And that's why we've got to be thinking, how do we get the private capital and private sector into the impact space? So that first webinar that we had with Amanda was really about just talking about the state of play as it is, and looking at how can we particularly do a bit better in the measuring and reporting area of the corporate space and the impact of corporates in relation to SDGs. The next slide then looks at the second webinar we had, which was with Safaricom. And we spoke to Karen, Joe, and Eve in that webinar, and very impressively shared how Safaricom had built sustainability efforts that had been very much in line with the growth that the company has experienced over the last couple of years, to almost, at some point, I think it was about 50% of the Nairobi Stock Exchange in terms of value. So increasingly more and more evidence is coming in to show that you can integrate SDGs and convert profit and purpose in your day-to-day work. And African corporates with their local know-how are best placed to demonstrate the convergence of profit and purpose because of the diverse opportunities and challenges they're solving on the continent. In many ways, Africa is a source of many solutions that the world is looking for, from renewable energy to how you get financial inclusion done properly, because we offer extremes of conditions, and what were embarrassing problems 20 years ago are exciting impact opportunities today. So the next slide will also, before I forget, I do want everyone to take note of the fact that we are having our annual conference in Nairobi, November 4th to 6th. It promises to be an exciting 3 days where I expect people to come and get a bit of an unconferenced conference. In as much as we'll have some panels, we are going to be very deliberate about helping people acquire skills. So we've made a lot of room for masterclasses and workshops. And one of the workshops you're likely to get will be done by Alastair today on how can you convert profit and purpose. And most of these workshops will also lead to bigger training programs that AVP will be partnering with other partners to deliver next year. So please put this in your diaries. This is not one to miss. November 4th to 6th in Nairobi, the AVP conference. So next slide. And so without further ado, I do want to welcome Alastair and also thank everyone who's put their details in the chat. Bernard from Ghana, Hillary from St. Petersburg, Florida, thank you and welcome. Charmaine Nkosi from Siaka Consulting, Lesejo from South Africa, thank you so much for making time. So Alastair, thank you for being with us today. It's been long time coming. We've been looking forward to having you on board. Thank you so much for making time.
It's a pleasure, Frank. Really glad to be with you, and thank you for the invitation.
Yes. So Alastair, let's jump right into it. I'd like, for people who don't know what you do and what your organization stands for, can you elaborate on the concept of mutual value creation and what makes your approach to purpose distinctive? And tied to that, What strategies have proven effective for companies trying to balance purpose and performance without compromising either of those two aspects? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would love to, and thank you again for the invitation. It's great to be with you guys on the call, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end as well. But just as a brief intro, Mutual Value Labs is an organization that actually spun out of the Mars Incorporated company. So if you are a fan of Snickers or Mars bars or Twixes, or in Kenya it would be PK gum, which we'll hear a bit more about, but Juicy Fruit, Wrigley, Skittles, M&Ms, all of those are Mars brands. And if you're a cat or a dog lover, and we'll also have a case on this later, if you feed them Whiskas, Shiba, Pedigree, Royal Canin, then you are part of the Mars family in terms of the products that you're purchasing. So we're now actually an independent entity based in Switzerland, and we're building all of our work on this concept of mutual value creation, which I'll unpack in a minute. But some people like to call us a consultancy firm, but I much prefer the phrase insight to impact partner. And you'll see why, this phrase is a meaningful one for me anyway, because we're not a consultancy in the traditional sense. The joke about consultants is the most important contract to a consultant is the next one. and our intent is actually not to consult with anyone and everyone. It's actually to work really closely with people who are intent on doing purpose really well. Safaricom is a great example of a company, a large corporate that is like, we don't want to do purpose peripherally. We want to do it in a way that really challenges our business model. And that brings me to your first question around like, what really is mutual value creation? Is it a version of sustainability? Is it a version of ESG? Is it enlightened, stakeholder capitalism? Like, where does it fit in this kind of world of ideas? And I have a quick couple of slides that hopefully will really illuminate this question, because it's so important that we get it right. And our view around mutual value creation is deceptively simple. We basically think that we are one evolution short in our thinking in terms of what's next within capitalism. So this is still within capitalism. No one is saying mutual value creation is a step to, a more socialist way of thinking about business. This is very much about capitalism, but we're still one evolution short. And we have a tagline at Mutual Value Labs, which is, the Mutual Value Lab seeks a better way of seeing and doing business. And that's because what we are realizing in our work is that the way that we see the problems, you've mentioned Africa as the problems 20 years ago that were embarrassing are now a source of real opportunity for the continent. Like, if we can see those problems in the right way, the purpose and profit equation is going to work. And we've had a long time of what we called shareholder value, right? Which is the whole Milton Friedman world, where the only thing that a company saw was its shareholders. How do we make our shareholders happy? How do we deliver value to our shareholders? And the offset of that was, well, the externalities that we have to manage, we can manage through something called CSR. Then our vision was improved, probably, since the financial crisis, accelerated again through COVID. And we're in what we would call the stakeholder value moment. So the company is recognizing that the shareholder is just one stakeholder in a wider ecosystem of players, and that actually strategies related to ESG, creating shared value, I'm sure you've all heard of Michael Porter's work around creating shared value, and sustainability. So all of these ideas come from an idea of, we can't just create value for our shareholders, we have to recognize that there's value to be created for other stakeholders. This is great. And this is where we think that applications of the purpose and profit equation are mainly housed in the way that we see value creation for a business, but there's one evolution left, and that's what we call mutual value creation. And the deceptive thing about this is that only one thing has really changed, and that's who's at the center of this diagram. So the company is no longer at the center, it's a stakeholder up here, and your purpose is at the center. And we believe that this is such a fundamental shift because you're actually asking a company to not think about itself first and foremost, but about the role it plays in solving broader challenges, of which it might be a player, but not necessarily the center point of that. And let's take a definition of ESG, for example. ESG, the best definition of ESG is what are the non-financial topics that are financially material to your business? And we believe that there's two points there that limit the ability for purpose to really flourish, and therefore limit our ability to deliver on ESG, the SDGs. Those 2 points are, what are the financially material non-financial topics, right? So let's turn every problem in the world into a version of a financial number. That's the first mistake, because it narrows the way that you look at the problem. Turning things that are trust breakdowns or breakdowns around well-being or meaning within workforces into just what does it cost? What is it the effect on my bottom line? Actually short circuits your ability to solve that problem. And the second bit of that statement is material to my company. Right? It shouldn't just be material to your company. Materiality needs to be broader than the impacts on your company. And actually, purpose has its best application when it's not company-centric, but purpose-centric, and when it's not focused on financial performance alone, but on holistic performance. And the case studies that I'll show you are really, really strong examples of how companies making this shift from just stakeholder value and the ESG logic into mutual value unlocks something different in its performance. And there, like in our work, we really say that there's just 3 really fundamental pieces to getting this transformative approach to purpose really straight. So the first is a purpose should be expressed as a meaningful challenge. So we would say, and this is if you've read any work of Professor Colin Mayer at Oxford University, this is the definition that he's come up with, and that we worked very closely with him on, is that the purpose of business, the broad purpose of business, is solving the problems of people and planet profitably, and not profiting from creating problems. So if that is your underpinning piece, the source of your innovation, the source of your value creation model is, what are the problems out there that I'm adjacent to, so close to, that I can be part of solving, but probably not solving on my own, probably solving in partnership. Probably I can't solve them today, but if I invest in a new product or in service, I could solve them tomorrow. So actually formulating your purpose so that it creates this sweet spot between your business today and who you want your business to become tomorrow. And it's allowing that problem-solving mindset. So Colin Mayer actually very recently just published a new book where he introduces the idea of problem-solving capitalism. So not just stakeholder capitalism, but what he says, problem-solving capitalism, and that's where it comes from. The second piece is, well, once you've found that meaningful challenge that you want to solve, maybe it's creating low-carbon economies in Nairobi or low-carbon transportation in Nairobi. This is a possible client that we have at the moment. Then it's not that's a question of where to play. But there's another question of how do you actually create the mutual value? And we say that your ability to solve a problem is directly correlated with how well you understand that problem. So you throw good money after bad when you try and shortcut an understanding of a problem and you solve a symptom instead of a root cause. So step 2 is make sure that you work with your stakeholders, you understand their pain points so that you're sure that you're solving a root cause and not a symptom. And then you begin to find the real raw material for your business model innovation. And then the last but not least step is, how do you measure success? Well, this is a business. So let's not kid ourselves. We're going to have to be able to create internal incentives for people to perform against, KPIs that people can track over time and think about progress on at least a quarterly basis. How do you then talk to investors and people who are supporting the innovations about the holistic performance that you have? So these icons here are the forms of capital that we track. And again, our case studies will show these. Natural capital is the green one. Human capital is the yellow, social capital is the red, and shared financial capital is the purple. If you do these 3 things well, the likelihood is that you are designing truly transformative purpose work. Hopefully that answers the first set of your questions.
Yeah, Alastair, interesting. So do you, as you think about what you've done, I mean, the concept of purpose-driven organization and problem-solving capitalism, Are we winning globally? When you look at the trends of what's happening, are we winning?
I'd have to say, I mean, you mentioned the SDG financing gap.
Yeah.
I'd say, I think it's obvious that we're not. And I would say that my biggest worry is what I would call the half-truth, right? So we're pouring money, I would say, into the stakeholder capitalism idea, right? The ESGs, the sustainability projects, which are good in and of themselves. They're doing good work. No one's saying that these things aren't having a positive impact, but they're not transforming the core of the way our businesses are thinking about how they create value, which means in an ironic sense, it's like a charity dollar. So it was Muhammad Yunus that said the reason why we can't just have charities because a charity dollar has one life, but a business dollar has multiple lives, right? And the irony is that we're investing essentially charity dollars into sustainability and ESG initiatives because they're not attached to the core value creation model of business. And that, for me, if I had one purpose to articulate around what Mutual Value Labs is trying to do, it's to say, we need that investment that's going into one-off sustainability projects on the fringes of your business into a rethink of the way that you're creating value, full stop. And by the way, you will create financial returns and you'll solve those sustainability challenges that you have as well. But you need to think about that prior question. How are we creating value? What's the engine behind our value creation model?
Okay, so solving problems for people and planet profitably, not profiting from creating problems. That, I think, will be the crux of what many would probably be thinking, is this really practical? So I think your case study that you bring up will really illustrate that. And it's, what I found fascinating when I was looking at your work prior to this webinar was just how in redefining that problem, it totally changes your mindset and opens up a totally different set of opportunities that your previous definition of the problem or opportunity would have probably been very narrow. So please take us through the two case studies that you have, I think would be really beneficial to the audience. And the audience, as Alastair walks through these case studies, please put your questions in the chat. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. Alastair, back to you.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, and yeah, just to reiterate what Frank's saying, please do just pop in your questions. I'm happy to stop and take them if they're really pertinent. So yeah, let's make this as interactive as possible. So obviously you guys are primarily, I saw someone from Florida, but I think most of you guys are Africa-based on the webinar. So let's start with the piece of work that actually kicked off our entire journey. So this whole concept of mutual value creation started where the conference will take place in Kibera slum in Nairobi, Kenya. And it was at the request of the Mars leadership where they said, look, we've got business challenges in this part of our markets. We haven't been able to crack it in a traditional way. Maybe you guys can crack it in a non-traditional way. And that was back in 2013. And so 10 years on, and actually there is no project because this project is the business in Kenya. Right, so it is a fundamental revenue stream of the Kenya business for Mars Wrigley. So the main products will be, you can see the shirts in that picture, Juicy Fruit, Double Mint Gum, and PK in Kenya specifically. And this was our first project where we begun to realize some unusual patterns about how value is created. And that first pattern was actually when you get your purpose right, so you can see at the top here what the purpose is, to improve the income and well-being of impoverished communities while opening new markets. Bringing that business component, the market is the business component, and the income and well-being of impoverished communities is the impact component. You can bring these things together, but the unusual piece, and it's the kind of the tagline at the top of the slide, is that it's the impact elements that are the leading indicators of the financial element, right? So if you focus on the impact areas and you do a really good job of that, the business benefits come. If you just think about the business benefits and how impact can sit on top of the business benefits, actually you're less likely to get the business benefits at all, and you're less likely to have the impact. So actually the phrase that we came up with, more as a joke, but it seems to have stuck, is that if you don't follow the money follows you. But we're very used to following the money and we're trained in business schools and in our economics classes and in our universities to follow the money. But actually this model around value creation is that there are more fundamental forms of capital that need to be managed that are leading indicators of financial performance, not money itself. So this program has actually scaled, and we won't be touching on what's happening in all of these countries, but this program has been scaled to Tanzania, Rwanda, Egypt, Philippines, and so on. And it continues to be a really important piece of what we're doing. But the purpose now is just, let's drill down on what we did. And the whole point of each case is to show each of those 3 steps in action. So how do we actually take each of those 3 steps and design business models behind them? So we did a few really interesting things with this business model. We first of all, and this is key, is that we didn't want to create a heavy kind of set of capital costs or upfront costs for the business, right? That's a classic, what we'd call, value chain approach, where a large company wants to dominate the value chain, own large components of the value chain to extract the most amount of value, etc. Right? That kind of logic doesn't really work with purpose. You have to participate with other stakeholders, and we use this language of orchestrate your ecosystem. The language of orchestration is really deliberate. So you might think of an orchestra where there's 12 different instruments. Someone's on the trumpet, and someone's on the tambourine, and someone's on the violin, and someone's on the saxophone, right? Everyone plays their role, but there's just one person who plays no instrument and yet is the most influential person on stage. Who is that? The conductor. So that's what we mean. There needs to be a player in an ecosystem that takes on that conductor role. They don't necessarily play an instrument. They're not the loudest, they're not the biggest, but they wield this influence, and they say, now's the time for you to come in. Now's the time for you to come in. And they have this overall picture of what the music should sound like. Take that analogy and use it for the way that you think about your business. Do you have a picture of the way that this ecosystem should be working, who the players are, what their capabilities are, what their pain points are? Because if you don't have that, you're probably not going to get this purposeful business model planned out as you should. So with us, we realized that actually, if Mars went in and tried to create these route to markets with these entrepreneurs, there would be not enough trust between the entrepreneurs and Mars. These are people who would say, who are you coming into our community, offering us all the good in the world? We've heard that before. We're not interested. We've done this work with cocoa farmers in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. We, as a company, we go in and they say, all we get from you is lies. We don't want to participate with this. So actually, our role is not to be the face of these programs. Actually, we want to empower others to do it. So what we discovered was that actually the NGOs, and in particular in the slum areas in Kenya, the churches, were the most influential in terms of saying, you can trust these guys. The program has real meaning to it. They're not going to leave you. They're not going to just promise you one thing for a year and deliver it for 1 month. So that was a key part of the whole strategy. But then we needed to actually show that tangibly, not just say that. So actually one of our biggest things is this bullet point about allowing the entrepreneurs to sell any product. So we've seen it. Unilever have done this, P&G have done this, where they do route to market programs, but you can only sell Unilever products. You can only sell P&G products. And we said, well, actually, that wouldn't be purpose-led. You can sell whatever you want. So we're going to get you the bike. We're going to get you the cars. Even if by the end we are getting motorbikes. We're going to give you all of these productive assets, but we're not going to force you to only sell our product because we don't think that's right. Why? Because it's a purpose lens first, not the business lens first. The purpose lens says, do not restrict these entrepreneurs to your product only, because the number one goal is to improve their income and their well-being, right? If you made the business lens first, you would say, if we're going to get you all of these things, you only sell our stuff, full stop, right? That would be the logical business conclusion. But we're saying, don't put that as a number one piece. Your number one piece is the non-financial performance, not the financial performance. Okay, you can sell whatever you want. If you want to sell shampoo, sell shampoo. If you want to sell a rival, chewing gum, sell a rival chewing gum. That's fine. We are interested in making you the best quality entrepreneur that you can. And so on top of that, we had training classes on selling, how to meet new people, on their own emotional well-being, leadership classes, not just things about managing budgets or being a good entrepreneur in a traditional sense, but actually building into their lives. How can they be better husbands, better wives, these kinds of things. And basically the performance of this way of thinking, of putting forward the impact lens before the business lens, created a remarkable business model. So this is what the ecosystem ended up looking like. So you can see that actually Mars didn't play any direct role in these things. We just played the orchestration role, the conductor's role. So we were providing products through the distributor. The field officers were not employed by us, they were employed by NGOs, but we offered them, the field officers, training. We gave them different kinds of support, financial, non-financial. Then the field officers would recruit all these different participants in the ecosystem, the hawkers, the retailers, the uplifters. And it would be the field officers who would also run training programs, do the inspiration, collect their needs, do all of that kind of conductor work on the company's behalf. And so the only stakeholder in this kind of ecosystem that was really close to the business was the field officer. And it was all about empowering the field officer. And what we did with the field officer, again, the business lens would say the field officer needs a sales target, right? If they're going to manage the stock point, the hawkers, the uplifters, and the retailers, the key KPI for them is going to be sales. Wrong, right? The key KPI for this program was the social capital and human capital amongst all the participants in the program. So by human capital, we meant the level of satisfaction with their income, with the level of satisfaction with their tools and equipment. So whether they're happy with their carts and their bikes and so on to be able to deliver the program, and their social capital. So the level of trust between the stakeholders within the program and within the community. Because if the program, like one of the biggest drawbacks in any route to market program like this is stealing. Someone puts their cart on the side and they go off to use the toilet and they come back and half the stock's gone, right? So if you're operating in a community of low trust and that's happening all the time, there's no way these people can make an income. So actually you have to grow the trust in these communities. Don't steal from that person because we're all in this together. So all of our effort was going on into this, knowing that if we did that right, they would make a lot of sales, that they would earn a better income, and that they'd be more satisfied with their job. What we then did, so you can see here, all of those metrics that we've put together are on the side here. And I'll get to the bottom two, which are the benefits to the business. But as this program grew over the years from a few hundred to 1,000, just in Kenya alone, we begun to create the infrastructure for this to scale. So for an uplifter who was just doing it very part-time to then become a stock point, to give them training to actually what we ended up calling graduate through the program, until that they'd done so well that actually they were leaving the program and setting up more independently. So what we did was we created essentially the technology behind it. So the management dashboard was the thing that we put into Mars. Hey, Mars, this is what's happening, within this route to market. So you can keep track of the sales, but also so you can keep track of human capital and social capital, because those are going to be your leading indicators of your financial performance, not the other way around. We helped the distributor who had some problems with finding all the different stock points in the slum areas, and they were not being able to access them. So we had every stock point kind of GPS marked so that the distributor could find them every time. This was the kind of work. All the work was going into the orchestration piece. So that's the key piece here. Like Mars is not creating huge overheads, investing tens of millions in this innovation program. Mars is facilitating an ecosystem that is now beginning to grow and run itself. And so when I come to the performance, that actually 15% of the country's net sales, so 3.6 million, comes from this program alone, you can see how that technology is beginning to create this essentially mutual cycle of value creation. but led by human and social capital, resulting in more human and social capital, but also more financial capital. And so when you actually look at retained earnings, because of this program being so agile and having such low overheads, it actually is 2 times the retained earnings of the traditional Mars business, right? This is the power of shifting away from dominating my value chain into ecosystem thinking, putting the purpose principles first, and letting the money follow you and not following the money. So this is one of our key route to market programs. And as you can see, the success has now meant that it's rolling out to a lot of different countries. This is no longer a side part of the business. This is integrated into the business and is the core revenue stream for Mars Wrigley Kenya. Shall I stop there and take some questions on?
Yeah, Alastair, just one question from my side. You said 15% of net value is now coming from this. What was it before the program?
Oh, well, obviously that's all top line addition for the business. So, I mean, we started off at probably the net sales value of it was, in the first year, we were probably contributing about 100K. And so we've been basically growing it every year, double digit, since then. So it's probably 8 years since we first started the program, and it was adding to the business. So yeah, it's a program that has now a meaningful contribution of 15% contribution to the top line.
Yeah, and this is how now Mars is rolling out their businesses in the other countries, replicating the same program. That's my understanding, right?
Exactly. So this became a core strategy in what Mars calls the emerging markets, where Mars has a very small footprint, small local presence. It can't invest in big infrastructure and big sales teams. And this will be a problem for every FMCG company. How do we grow in places like Indonesia, India, different parts of Africa, right, where we're not going to be able to do big CapEx spends on growing a local office? We want to employ locally. We want to partner locally. What is our business model behind that? And we're saying it's a purpose-led business model, and it looks like this. So that's why those markets are all emerging markets in the Mars language.
Okay, Alastair, please go ahead and jump to the second case study, and then we'll take some questions from the audience at the end. So please proceed to the second one.
Okay. So this is one with another part of the Mars business, so the pet care side of the business. I saw that there's someone from Florida, so this will be in EU. This is based in the US, and it's with a business called Royal Canin. So Royal Canin is one of the biggest brands within Mars. So people usually think of Mars as M&Ms and Snickers and so on and Twix, but actually the pet care business is now actually is a larger part of the annual revenue of Mars. So technically, it's no longer a confectionery business; it's a pet care business, and this is a very premium product. So they even would describe themselves as a nutraceutical business, a pet nutraceutical business. So, like almost pharmaceutical level pet care. I mean, pet products on the nutrition side for cats and dogs. It's a $5 billion business, and it's had double-digit growth for over 2 decades. So this is a business that has thrived and is thriving, and is certainly kind of the jewel in the crown of the Mars brand. And it's also the business that we have worked with the most extensively. So we have done a huge amount of work with this business to understand its value creation model, to codify it around thinking about purpose. And we are seeing some just tremendous and robust evidence. And this case study is probably the most robust evidence that we have to date, that when you do certain things right, when it comes to purpose, the purpose and profit equation isn't just wishful thinking. It's actually doable. So the first piece, and this is focusing on that first step of the 3 that I landed on, like get your meaningful challenge right. So a lot of large corporates will have a very high level purpose statement. And Mars Pet Care was no different. They said that, hey, we exist to create a better world for pets. Nothing wrong with that statement. We would agree with it. We can get behind it. But can you use this to drive a business model or a way of thinking about your value creation? Probably not yet. It's too high level. What do we mean by better? Like, we couldn't really articulate that. You know, with the previous program, we had a really clear purpose around what the impact should be, right? It should be increasing the income and the well-being of impoverished communities. Those things are measurable. A better world for pets, not so much. Okay, let's make it more measurable. So we worked with the leadership team, and they said, well, what we mean by better really is health through nutrition. It's actually, we think that we can help pets be better off, be healthier through taking our product, our nutritional product. And we said, yes, but by the way, that is stakeholder value. You're still putting your purpose, you're still putting your company at the center, not your purpose, because you're making it about the products and services that you sell, not making it about the impact you have. That's putting the business before the purpose. So don't make that mistake. Get rid of the through nutrition piece, because now you're decentering yourself. You've moved yourself from the stakeholder value box into the mutual value box. So that's the mutual value creation box. You're in there now. You've taken your product and your service and your benefit out of the middle, and you've put the purpose in the middle. So no more through nutrition. This is what you get. Improve the health of cats and dogs. Why is that so transformational? It's subtle, but it's huge, because all of a sudden the size of the pie is not the nutrition space for pet care. The size of the pie is the whole pet care space as it relates to health. And if you own a dog, what it eats is one thing. Whether you walk it enough is another thing, right? Whether you give it enough attention and stimulus, another thing, right? So if you're not just interested in nutrition, but you're interested in health, it's not enough to sell cat food and dog food. You have to do more than that. And then it poses this really important purpose question. What is the more that your business can do to solve this purpose? Why is that so important? Because it's the innovation strategy question that every business asks itself and has to answer. And we're saying purpose gets you a better answer to that question than anything else. So one of the first things that happened with Rolkin, and it's not the subject of this case, but it's really interesting, is that then they looked into buying the company that sells the Fitbit for dogs, right? So yes, we're going to supply the food, but we also want to know whether you're walking your dog enough. So we're going to buy the company that sells a collar that says if your dog's walked enough steps, right? That is a direct outcome of this switch in logic of, let's not just think about what we're selling today. Let's think about the contribution we can make to this purpose in a broader way. So let's go and think about whether the dog is walking enough and see if we can get the Fitbit for dogs. And this case study actually takes that logic and goes even further. So this is what happens to your ecosystem when you get your company out of the center, get your business objective out of the center, and focus on delivering a meaningful challenge as your purpose. This set of stakeholders is your expected list of stakeholders. No surprises there if your goal is to be the leader in premium pet food sales. And that was essentially the goal. Yes, we want a better world for pets. We're going to get a better world for pets by selling more of our pet food. That was the simple business logic. And we said, no, purpose is more complicated than that. But purpose will also mean that you have a better chance of delivering on that goal than if you don't do it this way. So if you want to improve the health of cats and dogs, all of those stakeholders remain important. No one's taking away the importance of those business stakeholders, but you have a whole load of other stakeholders that you need to talk to. You need to talk to vets. You need to talk to groomers, the veterinary schools. One of my favorite is, well, if you really want to improve the health of cats and dogs, where are the worst off cats and dogs in terms of their health? Well, they're the abandoned ones in the shelters that have been rescued. So if they're not a key stakeholder of yours, then you're not taking your purpose seriously. But what this outer ring represents is your innovation space. Your purpose-led innovation space is the cumulative effect of understanding all of these stakeholders. And if you can do that well, you can design an awesome purpose-led business model. And I'm just going to focus on a subset of these stakeholders in this case for how that really worked. So one of our tools, and you've heard me talk about ecosystems a lot, is to actually visualize ecosystems. So there's a very scary application of systems thinking, which usually looks like a slide with about 15 to 20 circles and about 100 lines connecting them and feedback loops and different numbers saying, hey, here's a systemic perspective of what's going on, and no one except the person who made it has any idea what's going on in it. So we like to actually take that thinking, but actually visualize it so that people can engage in it. So this image here is one of our systemic maps, and actually it holds all the pain points of the stakeholders. So one of our sad but true sayings is there's no such thing as a pain-free stakeholder in your ecosystem. And actually, the pain points are the things that you need to work with to devise the solution, to understand the root cause that you're trying to solve for. And the reason for that is basic business logic. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of entrepreneurs in the room, right? The basic basis of a business model is, have you identified an emerging unmet need of a stakeholder where you can provide a solution that people are willing to pay for? Then you have a business model, right? You find the problem, you see who is willing to pay for it, and then you design the solution that they should be willing to pay for, and then you have a business. And we're saying you're just changing the inputs. The emerging and unmet need that you're trying to solve for is related to the purpose or meaningful challenge that you have. Then the people that will pay for it are the people whose problems you're solving. And then you build the business model around the problems that you're solving, and then you have a purpose-led business. So it's just changing the inputs. And here we're saying, and these stakeholders amongst veterinary nurses, vets, behaviorists, insurance companies, diagnostics labs, and pharma labs, in this healthcare system here, the subset of the meaningful challenge, there is a real root cause issue that's going on. So what we discovered was that actually vets, and in the US, this is true, the vets have the highest suicide rate of any profession. Quite an alarming fact. Vets have the highest suicide rate in the US of any profession. Why? Because they spend the same number of years as a human doctor training to be a vet, so 7 years to 8 years. Then they have to set up their own veterinary practice usually. So they end up having to become small business owners as well. And then they realize that once they've set up their business practice, having spent 7 years studying, that they spend more of their time doing admin than they do looking after cats and dogs. Which is hugely, it just kills their sense of meaning, their purpose, their well-being, their satisfaction. I did not train 7 years to end up pushing papers to authorities and filling out accounts and tax forms. That's basically how they feel. When they do get to do the veterinary work, they often are having to do everything. So performing like routine consultations, checking up on basic health, too complicated, surgeries on stomachs, on knees, these kinds of things. They have to do the whole thing. And that means that their businesses are usually close to failing. So vets are incredibly depressed, incredibly overworked, incredibly unhappy as vets. Veterinary nurses have a similar set of pain points. They train not as long, but when they train, they usually get hired by vets and get asked to do very menial things. They get asked to clean up the surgery after a dog's pooed on the floor, or sterilize all of the surgery equipment, take bookings over the phone and fill in all the appointments. Like they get asked to do things that are very that any administrator could do, and no one that you wouldn't need a veterinary qualification of any kind to do that. And then the pet owners are saying, well, why is it so expensive to take my pet to the vet? That doesn't make any sense. If you want me to have a better relationship with the vet and to improve the health of my cat or my dog, then vet prices need to come down. And insurance companies aren't helping. And so there's this whole set of root causes around vets, pet owners, veterinary nurses, insurance companies, and the like. And so basically, when we put all of these things together, we're realizing that there's a root cause here that we could solve if we actually connected all of the dots that we were hearing about. And so the program that we designed was actually to support veterinary nurses, and in the process, create a better business conditions for the vets, so that their veterinary practices could perform better and make them more accessible to pet owners to bring their dogs and their cats to the vet. So the solution that we devised was around supporting the professional well-being of veterinary nurses. So Here you can see that after we did all of this analysis, we double checked that this was the thing to solve, right? If we could solve this thing for veterinary nurses, we would unlock incredible value in the ecosystem. So here's a survey that went to 800 veterinary nurses. So we had interviewed, about 15, and we thought, okay, if we can fix this, then we're going to be doing something pretty special. These were the set of survey questions that they answered, and these three kind of core dimensions explain 98% of what was going on in their job satisfaction. Right. So one of the big things was that vets spent so long completing their paperwork because veterinary nurses would join for 6 months and say, I'm not taking any more appointment bookings. I'm not sterilizing any more equipment. I'm not cleaning any more dog poo off the floor. Like, I'm leaving. And actually, one of the biggest reasons why veterinary practices were failing financially was because, I think we all know this, right? The cost of hiring, onboarding, and then if people leave, dealing with the handover of people leaving is one of the most expensive aspects of running any business. Right. So there was a huge opportunity once we saw this figure. So what we did is we designed something that's now called the PNAP program, which is basically a professional training program for veterinary nurses. Because what they were all saying to us was, hey, we're systematically undervalued. Okay, we're systematically ignored. We could be creating so much more value for pet owners and for vets, and yet no one is listening to us. So we said, well, we'll create the program that gives you the ability to run nutrition consultations. So you can see how this is tying back into the Royal Canin business. That will mean that it will release the time of vets who usually would take those appointments to do the value add surgeries. So if vets aren't taking an hour to talk to pet owners about what to feed their pet and basic healthcare, but are doing the more expensive work that they've been trained to do, which gets called performing at the top of their license, then actually we'll charge the right amount for the surgery and the right amount for the consultation. So the price of the consultation can come down, become more affordable, which will drive more revenue and more traffic to the vets, whilst allowing the veterinary nurses to actually perform tasks that they want to do rather than booking appointments and being essentially a glorified executive assistant. So we said, let's do this. We ran, and the reason why this is such robust data that I'll get to in a second is that we enrolled these 488 nurses across a variety of different practices in the US, and 354 we kept track of, but they did not participate in the program. So basically, we had a group that were our treatment group and a group that were our control group. And we were able to compare the performance of the veterinary practices and the veterinary nurses themselves versus those who participated versus those who didn't. And these are the results. So this program cost Royal Canin $251,000 of investment. So that program, a one-day training program to equip veterinary nurses to run nutrition consultations, cost $251K, 12 months. So we did a before and after. Okay, so what we discovered, so again, we were focused on how do we address their pain points from a non-financial perspective. So actually, the direct impact on their job satisfaction was to improve it by 24%, and the reduction in turnover rate was a reduction of 38%. So those are the leading indicators, right? Veterinary nurses were staying longer by 38%, and they were happier within their job by 24%. The financial returns on that 251K investment are insane. So 251K investment by Royal Canin resulted in a bottom line addition of 800,000, right? And a top line contribution of 2 million, just for Royal Canin. When we involve the veterinary practices themselves, right, their bottom line performance is an additional 4.4 million. And the top line revenue performance of all of those vets, in the end, there are about 600 veterinary practices across the US, was an additional 14.2 million. So the ecosystem benefits that this program brought were huge, and the direct benefit to Royal Canin was significant. So like the return on investment is unheard of. even within traditional investing communities, okay, to get 338% ROI on your investment. But the core thing is we understood this intimately. We understood the problem that needed to be solved, how it could be solved, and this became an expected outcome. The financial performance became the expected outcome because we knew we were solving a really significant root cause issue within this ecosystem. And if we solved that, we would unlock the mutual value that could be created for the rest of the players in the ecosystem. I think I'll stop there, Frank.
Thank you, Alastair. And for the audience, please do let us know if you have any question. You can raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat. So, Alastair, just building on what you've laid out there, how do you know you're solving the right problem? Because when you're doing your diagnosis, you could look at a variety of problems, and you could almost face a crisis of which one to choose. How do you know you're solving the right problem?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That's actually why we did the survey. We wanted to know that actually, hey, this, usually when we collect all the pain points, you could have 100 and something pain points, and you could be scratching your head like, okay, what are the pain points that I solve? And that's where the systemic work comes in. So what you want to do is, it's like that, it's the proverbial elephant in the room, right? So the root cause is the elephant, but one person's pain point is the trunk, and one person's pain point is the tail, and another person's pain point is the foot, right? And your job as the orchestrator of the ecosystem is to say, guys, you're describing the trunk, you're describing the tail, you're describing the foot, just to let you know it's an elephant, right? And so we did that. We said, guys, this is the elephant we're seeing, and we ran the survey. Do you confirm what we're seeing? And then we had those 800 participants say, yes, we do confirm it. And then we did the statistical analysis, and they said, okay, we're 98% sure we're solving the right thing here. I mean, that's a very scientific way to go about it. Not every company would want to see that level of certainty. I think if within smaller businesses that are more locally rooted, I think a lot of the staff would have good instincts on no, this is the one, that's the one that I'm looking for. So there's I'd answer that in a very scientific way. Like, you can do survey statistical analysis like we did, but there's an instinctive way, which is you describe the elephant, and then you can say, you can talk to a few people, and then you can ask yourself, I know this, context really well. I know the industry really well. I really know this problem well. This feels like the right thing. And we have examples of both the more instinctive approach and the more scientific approach.
Alastair, in our prior conversations, you've mentioned there are a couple of other sectors where you're looking at a similar approach. Do you want to share some high-level examples of other sectors and how purpose-led strategies are being implemented, or where you're working purpose-led strategies?
Yeah. So one of our biggest client areas or client industries at the moment is financial services, in particular retail and commercial banks. And they have a very interesting problem, particularly in places like the UK, where people haven't forgotten the financial crisis, and that the taxpayer was bailing out large banks because of their poor practices. And recently, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK launched something called the Consumer Duty Act, which is requiring all financial services organizations to show that they are designing their future products and services with better outcomes for customers at the heart of it. So it's quite a powerful regulatory push to say, we're fed up of financial services coming up with products and services that are just for their benefit, just selling, a mortgage on top of the mortgage, or the credit card on top of the credit card. Like, you can't just be selling these financial products without thinking about the benefit to the consumer. And so the piece of work that we've done with them is to say, well, if your goal is to improve the financial well-being of your customers, do you actually know what financial well-being means to them? So it's that piece of getting out of the middle, decentering yourself and putting the purpose in the center. So one of the high-level insights from that piece of work was the bank was already pouring in lots of, like, millions every year into financial capability training. So, you know, our most vulnerable customers are vulnerable because they don't budget very well, because they can't read they don't know how to calculate interest, because they can't read the terms and conditions of our products and services. So they get themselves into a hole. So we're going to invite all of our, you know, quote unquote vulnerable customers to come in, and we're going to train them so that they can budget better. They understand the terms and conditions of financial products, et cetera, et cetera. Millions of pounds into that. And then they scratch their head, like, why is this not actually changing their financial well-being? We're doing nice things, but there's no impact. And so we said, well, maybe those things that you think of as a bank are not the things that are most important to them. Like, what are the assumptions you have? Get out of the middle and put the purpose at the center. And so sure enough, we did our ecosystem mapping process, the same as with the pet care. And we discovered that, this is probably one of my favorite ones, that the bank was looking at certain households and saying that they were vulnerable because they're looking only at transaction data. So they're just seeing incomings and outgoings and seeing that, oh, this is a family that don't have much incoming, have quite a lot of outgoings, like any change in income, and they will be, you know, in a really bad situation. And what we discovered in our work with them was, for example, we ended up calling it the invisible economy. So the only thing that was visible to the bank was the data that was coming through transaction stuff for their current account. And we said, if you assess someone's financial well-being only on what you see in their current account, you're probably going to get the wrong picture. And what was happening was, this is definitely happening in communities across Africa, I'm sure in vibrant ways, but in the north of England, we did this study, and what was happening was there's a group of 4 moms, all single parents, all working part-time, 3 days a week. One mom on a Monday would go to school and collect the kids of all of the 4 moms so that the 3 other moms could work. Then on Tuesday, the next mom would pick up the kids of all of the 4 moms so that the other moms could work. And they had planned this elaborate, you know, childcare routine that enabled them to all work. So yes, the income is low, and that's what the bank is seeing. But are they truly vulnerable because from a broader well-being perspective? No, because the quality of the relationships in that community were so high, what we call social capital. They're not wealthy financially, but they're hugely wealthy in terms of their social capital. And so they're not as vulnerable as you think, because if a shock comes, they know exactly who's going to help them, Whereas someone who might be earning quite a lot of money, but is totally isolated, if they lose their job, they're more in trouble than these single moms, even though they're earning more, because there's no one there to support them. So this is the kind of insight where you put purpose at the center, and now the bank is totally rethinking their classification of vulnerable, because they're like, you're right, this isn't a fair representation of what it means to be a vulnerable customer.
Okay. It will be really interesting to follow up that one over time. I'd like to know where you land with that one. And are you doing any work in healthcare? Because healthcare is a big need area on the continent. Are you doing any work in healthcare?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of projects and actually specifically on diabetes care, type 2 diabetes care. And this is a great example, and it's probably the equivalent of the pet care example, where, you know, a company who wants to just sell more insulin, right? That's one thing, you know, but if you expand away from the company just thinking about its insulin sales to a company that wants to improve outcomes for type 2 diabetics, we all know that diabetes isn't just about managing your insulin. It's also about getting exercise and eating well and all of these other things. So a pharmaceutical company that can go from, actually, I'm not here to sell more insulin, I'm here to improve the outcomes for type 2 diabetics, all of a sudden realizes that its innovation space involves gyms and supermarkets and making sure that the tap quality water in a certain city is is high enough to drink. So one of my favorite examples from this case is this pharmaceutical company realized in Houston, Texas, which is the city in the world that struggles the most with obesity and therefore has a huge incidence rate of type 2 diabetes, is that after a storm, the water quality level had dropped below drinkable, which meant that many people in the city were going to supermarkets to buy water. But when they got to the supermarket, they realized that water was more expensive than soda. Because when you add the promotions, buy one, get one free on bottles of Coke, all of a sudden, which aren't available when you're buying Evian water or something, all of a sudden, I'm going to buy the Coke instead of the water. So any tap water I would have drunk has now become Coke. And there was this huge inflection point in the city of type 2 diabetes rates because the reliability of drinkable tap water had dropped. So the thing that the company did was to say, the most meaningful thing we can do as a purpose-led pharmaceutical company is not to capitalize on this and sell more insulin. It's to go to the utility services and say, how can we help you solve this tap water quality crisis? Because it is causing a huge public health problem. And as they begun to do that, the business benefit became tremendous because one of their biggest costs was the sales team. Right, to maintain the sales team, visiting all of the hospitals, all of the doctors, to get their insulin to be the preferred supplier. And all of a sudden, that sales team didn't need to exist because everyone in Houston said, hang on a minute, you're the pharmaceutical company that's helping us solve our water problem. I want you to be our preferred supplier. So before they knew it, the sales team were out of a job because their purpose work was doing the sales for them. And so we interviewed the CEO of that was overseeing this project, and he said the thing that I learned was that in our sector, the primary currency for the business model in healthcare is not dollars or pounds; it's trust.
Yeah, and I think when we spoke to Safaricom, that came out very clearly how they built so much social equity within the country of Kenya that many people trusted the company. And it's continued to grow and gets brand equity through that process. As they say, dance like no one's watching. Work.
I like that. There's a cool another Oxford professor called John Kay. It's a short book called Obliquity, but it's all of these stories about things like trust, things like happiness, things even profit. He says. These are all things that are byproducts of something else, not the product itself, right? So he has this word obliquity that describes this phenomenon. So he says, Frank, if you set out for your goal in life to be the happiest Frank you could possibly imagine, you would probably pursue some kind of hedonistic thing where you party as long as you want, drink and eat as much as you want, and before you know it, you're like in a gutter somewhere. That's what happens when you pursue happiness straight, like directly. But when you recognize that happiness is a byproduct, you do something called obliquity, which he means is you make sure that you invest in time in your family, you have close friends, you have hobbies, you have work that's meaningful to you. And all of a sudden you realize that doing all of those things makes you happy. So you've achieved happiness, but you've not achieved it because you've made happiness your goal. And he's saying, like, if you make trust your goal, no one's really going to believe you. Trust is a byproduct of doing all these other things really well, of standing by your word, of showing up when you say you're going to show up, of doing things that aren't only in your own interests. You do all of those things and you get trust, right? But if you just say, I'm going to be trustworthy, it doesn't really work like that.
So tell me though, Alastair, when all of said and done, in what ways have purpose-driven strategies led to competitive advantages to the companies you've studied? So is there evidence that this actually leads to, ultimately, let's be honest, many of these corporates want to make profits and they have shareholders and so on and so forth. Have they extracted the value that this could deliver, or has there been a compromise in saying, yes, we've done that, but actually we've lost something from a value creation to some of the stakeholders? What's been your experience?
It's a great question, and there isn't one answer to this. every company culture has they have a different ability to, what I'd say, hold their nerve, because this isn't once you embark on purpose, the results are guaranteed, right? I could never say that. No one in this space could ever say that. And things don't go perfectly. Things take unexpected turns. But if you're working with a large corporate that can hold their nerve, right? Okay, things aren't quite going as planned, but see it through to the end. Those are the companies that I think really experience outsized returns across, financial and non-financial. But I think the broad way I think about this question is, we usually have a continuum in mind, right? The doing well on one side and doing good on the other. And doing well is all about making money, and doing good is all about impact. And the conversation goes something like this, Alastair, Frank, what is the middle ground between doing well and doing good? And then we find, the midpoint, and we say, this is how you do well and do good, right? It's somewhere in the middle. It's a compromise. It's not quite as many returns, but it's financial returns, but it's almost, or you get the same amount of returns, but it's long-term. We have all of these ways of moderating that kind of expectation on the doing well side. And then on the doing good side, it's, okay, it's not deep impact, but we get some really nice outcomes. Or, it's not large, it's not scalable, but it's really meaningful for a small group. And eventually you have this conversation where you end up in the middle. And I would say that is the wrong conversation to have, right? You will inevitably end up trading off, not delivering on one side of the equation, or you disappoint everyone because the doing good crowd is not happy and the doing well crowd is not happy. And then you feel like you've let everyone else down. There's a third option, and I call it the synthesis option. Don't pick a point along a continuum. Find the synthesis of both points. And I would say the synthesis of doing well and doing good is just being good. What do I mean by that? I mean, if your company and your corporate, and I don't mean the whole corporation, just the business unit you're in charge of, the brand that you're in charge of, if that brand or business unit is not just about finding a middle ground between doing well and doing good, but is actually about being good, you'll solve it. Why? Because what's in common with those two case studies and that I presented in depth, and the pharma one and the bank one, is that being good means that you look at the problems that you face through the lens of purpose. And so I started the whole thing of the quality, a better way of seeing and doing business is actually dependent more on our ability to see than our ability to do. So if you can see through the lens of purpose, you will find business models that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. If you just begin with doing or compromises because you can't hold your nerve, that's in the end where I think you begin to fall short of what you're trying to achieve. So don't find the middle ground between doing well and doing good. Find the synthesis, which is about being good, which is a commitment to seeing through the lens of purpose at the problems that you face. Because there is enough evidence that I've seen over the last 10 years to say when you hold to that view, the solutions come, and so does the performance.
Yeah, I love this space because we're all learning and growing and experimenting. So views and new ideas and approaches are forever evolving. And I'll ask you to please unmute yourself and ask your question. But as you're doing that and just finding the unmute button, sometimes it can be a bit a struggle to get one. My next question, Alastair, to you would be, and then we'll take that question from the audience. Could you share some insights on just basically how businesses can foster a culture of innovation while staying true to their purpose and contributing to the SDGs, for example? How have you seen that being done well?
Yeah, that's also a good question, and I haven't really touched on it. At the core of what we're trying to do is build internal capability. And so your question around foster a culture of innovation, that phrase, foster a culture of seeing through purpose, not just doing purpose, is actually should result in some really high quality innovation. And so that joke that I started off with about, hey, we're not consultants that think about the next contract. We will want a journey with you for the long term, is because actually we've failed unless we've built the capability internally for organizations to do this for themselves. And innovation is key. And I would say like our starting point for that is, and we did this with Royal Canin, is we looked at the budget and we worked with the GM for the country, and the GM said, you know what, I can deliver my targets, my business targets, with 90% of my budget. With the 10% that's remaining, we are going to innovate with purpose. So that was at the start of a budgeting cycle. It needs to be that practical, because mid-year, you're not going to find the time and the space to do that. You have to build it in your plan. Look at the budget. Okay, I can deliver my targets. 95% of the budget will go to the business as usual, but that 5 is going to go into our purpose-led innovation stuff. Having that kind of rigor, that kind of planning, I think is really important. And then the second one is the permission to fail. Like if it's in no one's KPI to take risks in your team, you need to give someone that KPI. Don't pick anyone, pick the right person, right? But say, you know what? If at the end of our annual review, you've not failed, my hypothesis, like at one thing, my hypothesis is going to be that you didn't take enough risks for innovation to happen.
Yeah,
those would be my two ideas.
Yeah. And the reality, Alastair, I think one of the things we don't do enough in the impact space is we don't run enough experiments. We don't do enough of testing. You look at a company like Amazon, they're not the world's largest company for nothing. They run something like 80 to 120 tests every week. And some of them fail, some of them succeed, but when they do succeed, the value that you extract from those are huge. So I want to go to Ian's question. I don't know if it's a he or her, but he or she says they're not in a place where they can take, they can speak because it's noisy. Maybe that's a problem we solve for. How do we get people to get quiet places to take exciting webinars? But if you read his question, it sounds like your approach is one that is geared more towards adaptation, where the focus is on creating resilience as opposed to mitigation, which, though useful, is more about arresting the issues that are there without necessarily creating fundamental changes.
You might have to unmute, because so the way that I understand that question is, is the kind of critique, are we just nipping around the edges of ecosystems to try to find the lowest hanging fruit to solve, rather than making transformational change within, I guess, from an impact perspective? I would say that it's absolutely the opposite. Like we invest an incredible amount of time in making sure that we're solving fundamental things and not peripheral things. And actually the highway to, oh, hi.
Hello. Yes, I'm here. I've managed to sneak out. Yeah. So actually, I'm asking exactly what you've just explained, in a sense that you are looking for something a bit more, well, not a bit more, quite fundamental. So you're looking at the root cause of the problem, and as such, by solving for the root cause, you're then creating more sustainable solutions, because you're looking at, a more complete ecosystem, and as such, like I said, you're solving for the problem in a more fundamental and sustainable manner.
Yeah. So, So I'll continue the answer. Yeah, I think then I'm interpreting it right. Like the one way to making the purpose and profit equation not work is by solving peripheral problems. So, Frank's question around how do you know you're really solving a root cause and the right thing? Like, don't innovate, don't test and learn any solution until you're absolutely sure that you're solving for the right thing. That would be my advice. And in the case of I'm not sure which part of the case is making you feel like it's just peripheral components, but like in both cases, the easy thing to do would have been to say, in the case of the Mauer project, it would have been to say, oh, okay, all we'll do is give you some money and make you into salespeople to walk around these things, and we won't invest in any more deeply in what you're doing. We'll just make you kind of cheap labor within a sales team. Instead, we said, no, actually, we want to build on your entrepreneurial intent. We are not interested in just making you sell our product. We want you to sell the things that you think will sell because you're an entrepreneur, right? So if you think soap is going to sell soap. If you think shampoo is going to sell shampoo. That's fine. Do those things. And in the pet care case, we were saying, like, the way we were almost redesigning the veterinary business, which has got nothing to do with Royal Canin. Royal Canin just sells the pet food. And we actually went to the vets and looked at their business and said, your business model is broken. You're spending 50% of your time on admin tasks, 30% of your time on something that someone without your qualifications can do, and 10% on the times of the things that you should do. Like, your business model is totally out of whack. We're going to solve this for you. And that's why that number of 14.4 top line revenues for the ecosystem is so huge, because we solved a business model for someone who had nothing to do with us. We could have just said, go do an MBA, figure it out yourself. But we opted into that.
Yeah. I'll put you and Ian in touch after to maybe continue this conference, because I know we're coming to the end of our time. And one of the joys of being in what we do at ABP is really playing at the edge of trying and see how do we solve and come up with solutions for our current problems, because our old solutions are not working. So we push the needle pretty hard in terms of trying to be innovative with what we do and the partners we work with. And please, if you're going to join us for the conference, do come, because you'll get a bit deeper insights into the masterclass that Alastair is likely to run. And then the other thing that I'll also be running a class on how to use a brainstorming process, a problem-solving process, to come up with many ideas that you can then go to run a couple of experiments with. Because too many times we sit in a room and think, okay, we're having this problem, let's come up with some ideas, and three of us sit there and with some notes and notepads and try and think we can come up with something creative. But actually you can put a process behind that problem-solving thing and come up with some really creative and innovative solutions. So I'll be running a masterclass on that, and Alastair will be running one on this particular topic. So we're super excited about what we'll be doing when we come together in November. So Alastair, just in closing, closing remarks, first of all, thank you so much for making time. I mean, this has been a very interesting conversation. I'd just like to kind of, for you in your closing, to give us a sense of, what are we seeing? What are the trends we're seeing in this space of blending and converging profit and purpose? Are we seeing positive trends? Is it something which we think more and more corporates will see the value of going in that direction? What are the things that are holding many of these corporates back from going through this process? And then also, just what have you learned from the work that you've done so far?
Yeah. So I'll take the cue of focusing on big corporates because I think it is different depending on who you're talking to, whether it's on the investor side or SMEs or so on. And I don't want to ignore them from obviously the conversation, but just to focus on what I'm seeing with big corporates. I would say that I am positive. I think that there's going to be, I'd say, a very clear separation of the corporates that are going to take this really seriously and they want to dig into rethinking their value creation models versus the ones that are happy to continue to invest in ESG programs and so on. And there's some interesting research that's coming out from, I think it's NYU, that basically the biggest predictor of a good ESG score is the size of your compliance team. Right. So it's whoever can tick the box best is going to turn out the most favorably in ESG. And I think we're going to see the road split. And we want to be part of working with the companies that want to challenge the way that they create value. And I'd say, why is that so exciting? And what's the trend here? Is that actually and we've all heard it, Gen Zs are changing the way that B2C companies at least are thinking about how they create value, right? Where actually growth is not going to come from from volume anymore, because Gen Zs are consuming differently. They're consuming more quality, more experiences. So we work with some alcohol companies, and they know that their business model is severely under threat, right? They are not going to be successful in the future because they sell more cans of beer. They need to rethink that. And so I would summarize it as this: the corporates that recognize that what got them success in the past won't be what gets them success in the future, and see purpose as the premise and the basis of their future success, will be the ones that succeed, because I think purpose is the answer to that. And will be the ones that are most interesting to engage with and talk to in this short period. And the thing that will separate them out is their ability to see that this is not a trend that might happen, but is a trend that is happening. And that the quicker that they get their hands around it, and I'd say their heads, their hands, and their hearts around it, the better that they will perform in the short term and in the long term.
Alastair, in 30 seconds, if someone in the audience is thinking, I need to go and get my organization to get started on this purpose journey, what would be your recommendations? What are the things you think they need to start thinking about and doing?
So I would say, take your purpose statement right now and ask yourself, I did that little exercise with Royal Canin. Ask yourself, is this purpose statement more about us than it is about the problem that we think we're solving? Is there even a problem that we're solving? Right? If I can identify the problem I'm solving and it's more about the problem than about me, how could I hold a team or our business accountable to solving that problem? If you took your purpose statement right now this afternoon and you did that, you would come up with a really good picture of how close you are to rethinking your value creation model versus, doing all the nice purpose work, which is volunteer days for our team, a new HR handbook, it's on the wall, it's in our strategy, but nowhere do I see it in our commercials and the way that we create value. Like, if that's the moment that you're in, do that to your purpose statement, and you'll have a probably a new perspective on where that conversation could go. My second follow-up would be, go talk to a stakeholder that is not a usual business stakeholder, but is a purpose stakeholder. So the example from Royal Canin is the shelters. Go talk, once Royal Canin started talking to the shelters, it was a different conversation. They realized they had so much more to do. So I'd say, who's that stakeholder for your business? That isn't a core business stakeholder, but if you're purpose-led, is absolutely essential.
Alastair, thank you so much for your time. The audience, something really unique is, this is probably the one audience where we've kept over 90 or 80% of people who started the webinar from the beginning. So it's been intriguing to have everyone join us and everyone be part of us. I highly suggest that we stay in touch. I've put in my LinkedIn link on my page in the chat. Please, let's connect. If we're not connected already, I'm connected to quite a number of you. And let's stay in touch with us. We do some really interesting talks of this nature. We've got a couple of coming up. But most importantly, let's congregate in Nairobi in November. We're going to have some really cool fun trying to sort out Africa's SDG financing gap and moving capital towards impact. But thank you so much for your time, and everyone. And thank you, Alastair, for giving us an intriguing presentation. And for everyone who made time to be with us today, most grateful. Thank you so much. And have a nice evening.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks to you, everyone.
Thank you.